Continuing with F. Bruce's The Canon of Scripture. We left off last time in the middle of chapter 5, the Christian canon of the Old Testament. And we had talked about Justin Martyr, we talked about Origen, and now we're going to begin this session talking about Athanasius. Unfortunately, for the bulk of Origen's work, we are dependent on Latin translations, especially the translation of Rufinus of Aquileia, circa 345 to 410, carried out well over a century after Origen's death. Rufinus thought it proper to conform Origen's language to the orthodoxy and usage of a later age. For example, he represents Origen as using the word canon in the sense of canon of Scripture, as we understand the term. And footnote says in the Latin translation of his homily on Joshua 2:1, there is a reference to the assumption of Moses, although it is, and then, quote, although it is not received in the canon, end quote. But the words, that is, canone non habeatur, are those of Rufinus. But it is near certainty that Origen never used the Greek word canon, K-A-N-O-N, in this sense. The first writer known to have used it thus is Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. So he's saying that the term, that Athanasius, Rufinus represented that Origen had used that word canon in the sense of canon of Scripture, but Bruce says it's a near certainty Origen never did use the Greek word canon in that sense, canon of Scripture. So Rufinus was incorrect about that. The first writer known to have used it as canon of Scripture is Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. This was over 100 years after Origen. In one of his works on the decrees, defense of the Nicene definition, Athanasius mentions the Shepherd of Hermas, a work which elsewhere he calls a most profitable book, as not belonging to the canon. Quote, not belonging to the canon. And this is this work, Shepherd of Hermas, so Athanasius mentions the Shepherd of Hermas as not belonging to the canon, and he mentions that in his work on the incarnation of the divine word. More often, he uses the verb canonizo, K-A-N-O-N-I-Z-O, canonize, in the sense include in the canon. This is so in his most important treatment of the subject. One of the minor decisions of the Council of Nicaea, AD 325, was that to guard against any disagreement about fixing the date of Easter, the Bishop of Alexandria should have the privilege year by year of informing his brother bishops well in advance of the date of the following Easter. Throughout his long tenure of that see, 328 to 373, Athanasius issued 45 such festal letters. In each, he took the opportunity of dealing with some other matter of current importance. In the 39th letter, announcing the date of Easter in 367, he dealt with the canon of the Old and New Testaments. He was concerned about the introduction by some people of heretical or spurious works, which he calls apocryphal, among the books of Holy Scripture, and goes on, echoing the prologue to Luke's Gospel. Here's what he wrote. Inasmuch as some have taken in hand to draw up for themselves an arrangement of the so-called apocryphal books, and to intersperse them with the divinely inspired Scripture, concerning which we have been fully persuaded, even as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered it to the fathers, it has seemed good to me also, having been stimulated thereto by true brethren, to set forth in order the books which are included in the canon and have been delivered to us with accreditation that they are divine. My purpose is that each one who has been led astray may condemn those who have led him astray, and that those who have remained untarnished may rejoice at having these things brought to remembrance again. The books of the Old Testament, then, are 22 in number, for, as I have heard, this is the traditional number of letters among the Hebrews. End quote. He then lists them by name in order after the following pattern: 1. Genesis, 2. Exodus, 3. Leviticus, 4. Numbers, 5. Deuteronomy, 6. Joshua the son of Nun, 7. Judges, 8. Ruth, 9. 1st and 2nd Kingdoms, 10. 3rd and 4th Kingdoms, 11. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 12. 1st and 2nd Esdras, Ezra-Nehemiah, 13 Psalms, 14 Proverbs, 15 Ecclesiastes, 16 Song of Songs, 17 Job, 18 the 12 Prophets, 19 Isaiah, 20 Jeremiah with Baruch, Lamentations and the Epistle, 21 Ezekiel, 22 Daniel. Athanasius' total is the same as Origen's, but he lists Ruth separately from Judges and omits Esther. Athanasius then lists the New Testament books. He follows with some general comments on the unique value of Holy Scripture, including the admonition, "Let no one add to these nor take anything from them." And continues, "But for the sake of greater accuracy, I must needs, as I write, add this. There are other books outside these, which are not indeed included in the canon, but have been appointed from the time of the fathers to be read to those who are recent converts to our company and wish to be instructed in the word of true religion. These are the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Sirach, Esther, Judith, and Tobit. But while the former are included in the canon and the latter are read in church, no mention is to be made of the apocryphal works. They are the invention of heretics, who write according to their own will and gratuitously assign and add to them dates so that, offering them as ancient writings, they may have an excuse for leading the simple astray." Footnote says that notes in Athanasius' listing of the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Sirach, Esther, Judith, and Tobit, he adds the Didache and the Shepherd here. These bear the same relation to the canonical books of the New Testament as the 5 just listed bear to those of the Old Testament. As Athanasius includes Baruch and the letter of Jeremiah in one book with Jeremiah and Lamentations, so he probably includes the Greek additions to Daniel in the canonical book of that name, and the additions to Esther in the book of that name, which he recommends for teaching in church, for reading in church. He makes no mention of the books of Maccabees. Evidently, Athanasius makes a distinction between those books which are, quote, included in the canon, and others which are recommended for their inspirational and edifying quality. Only those works which belong to the Hebrew Bible, apart from Esther, are worthy of inclusion in the canon. The additions to Jeremiah and Daniel make no appreciable difference to this principle. Other works belonging to the Septuagintal Plus, however great their value, are relegated to a second grade. Footnote says that Athanasius does not say in so many words why Esther is not included in the canon. He may have inherited a tradition going back possibly to a Jewish source, which denied it canonical status. The apocryphal writings are not those which have been called so since Jerome's time, that is, for the most part, the Septuagintal Plus, but heretical works. They are subversive and ought to be utterly rejected. In practice, Athanasius appears to have paid little attention to the formal distinction between those books which he listed in the canon and those which were suitable for the instruction of new Christians. He was familiar with the text of all and quoted from them freely, often with the same introductory formula, "as it is written," "as the Scripture says," etc. Canons of Laodicea. Shortly before Athanasius issued his 39th festal letter, a church council was held at Laodicea in the Lycus Valley, circa AD 363. The canons, or rules, promulgated by this council were acknowledged by later church councils as a basis of canon law. Canon 59 lays it down that, quote, "no psalms composed by private individuals or any uncanonical books may be read in church, but only the canonical books of the New and Old Testament." End quote. Canon 60, the last of the series, then enumerates these canonical books. But the genuineness of Canon 60 is open to doubt. It is probably indebted to the Canon of Athanasius and other lists. It follows Athanasius closely, except that Ruth is attached to Judges as part of number 7, and Esther follows immediately as number 8. Later Greek Fathers. In the last 2 decades of the 4th century, other Greek fathers drew up lists of the canonical books to much the same effect as their predecessors. Cyril, Bishop of Jerusalem from 348 to 386, gives a list which follows Origen's, except that Baruch is included in one book with Jeremiah, as well as Lamentations and the letter of Jeremiah. Gregory of Nazianzus, circa 330 to 390, may have been the first of many down the ages to produce a list of books of the Bible in verse for easier memorization. Ever thought of that? The original scriptures weren't broken into verses. That's something that came later, and it says that Gregory of Nazianzus in circa 330 to 390 may have been the first to do that. Make it easier to memorize and so forth, easier for Bible drills, you know. In order to accommodate the names of the books, he had to employ a variety of meters. Like Athanasius, he gives the total of Old Testament books as 22 and omits Esther. Another metrical canon was drawn up by Amphilochius, Bishop of Iconium, who died sometime after 394. After listing the same Old Testament books as Gregory, he adds a line, quote, along with these, some include Esther. We have mentioned already that Epiphanius, circa 315 to 403, adapts an earlier bilingual list, which yields a total of 27 Old Testament books. Let's go back for just a moment to Amphilochius, who he says drew up another metrical canon. He was Bishop of Iconium and died sometime after 394. Footnote says that Amphilochius goes on to list the New Testament books and concludes with the words, quote, this would be the most unerring canon of the divinely inspired books, end quote. He is the next writer after Athanasius to use the word canon in this sense. We've mentioned already that Epiphanius, circa 315 to 403, adapts an earlier bilingual list, which yields a total of 27 Old Testament books. In another place, Epiphanius appends the wisdom of Solomon and Ben Sira to a list of New Testament books. Theodore of Mopsuestia and others, Mopsuestia. Theodore, Bishop of Mopsuestia, modern Misis, M-I-S-I-S, in southeast Cilicia from 392 to 428. He was bishop there from 392 to 428. Is best known as the most illustrious exponent of the exegetical school of Antioch. Some of his views on the canonicity of Old Testament books were regarded as dangerously radical. In his commentary on Job, he denies the, quote, higher inspiration of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Of the Song of Songs, he had no great opinion at all. He rejected the traditional titles to the Psalms and was suspected of rejecting Job and Chronicles. The earliest form of the Syriac Old Testament appears to have lacked Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. This might be because their canonicity was doubted, or it might be a fortuitous consequence of the fact that these books are the last in the traditional sequence of the Hebrew Scriptures. The further history of the canon among Eastern Christians will not be surveyed here. Suffice it to say that in 1642 and 1672 respectively, Orthodox synods at Jassy, Iasi, and Jerusalem confirmed as, quote, genuine parts of Scripture the contents of the Septuagintal Plus, the canonicity of which had been taken for granted. Specifically, 1st Esdras equals Vulgate 3rd Esdras, Tobit, Judith, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Maccabees, Wisdom, Ben Sira, Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, and the letter of Jeremiah. The Septuagint remains the authorized version of the Old Testament in Greek Orthodoxy, its deviations from the traditional Hebrew text being ascribed to divine inspiration. Most Orthodox scholars today, however, follow Athanasius and others in placing the books of the Septuagintal Plus on a lower level of authority than the proto-canonical writings. And he has a footnote here. In view of the fact that Theodore was Nestorius' teacher, it is noteworthy that the Nestorians also omitted Ecclesiastes and the Song of Songs. And we've come to the end of chapter 5, the Christian canon of the Old Testament in the East. And in our next session, we're going to close here. We're short of 20 minutes, but we went over in the last one, so it all balances out, I guess. Anyway, we'll take up next time with chapter 6, the Christian canon of the Old Testament in the Latin West. So these last two sessions have concentrated on the Christian canon of the Old Testament in the East. The chapter 6. Now the next session will be the Christian canon of the Old Testament in the Latin West. So, thank you for watching.